In 1987, the Aral Sea, once a massive freshwater giant containing over 1,000 cubic kilometers of water, officially split in two and began its final descent into a graveyard. The world watched as 60,000 square kilometers of seabed transformed into the Aral Desert, the youngest and harshest wasteland on the planet. We were told this was the end, a permanent scar on the map that no human effort could ever heal. But look closer. Against every scientific forecast, the water is rising again. Fish are multiplying by the millions, and thousands of people are abandoning major cities to return to a coastline that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. This entire spectacular revival was sparked not by a multi-billion-dollar miracle, but by a single 13-kilometer concrete wall blocking a strait that experts said was irrelevant. Why did a simple barrier succeed where the entire world's ecological experts failed? How did a topographic loophole rewrite the history of a dead sea? The truth is far more extraordinary than the disaster itself, and it begins with a choice that the establishment laughed at. Let that sink in. To understand what was actually lost, you need to hold two numbers in your mind simultaneously. In 1960, the Aral Sea covered 68,000 square kilometers and held over 1,000 cubic kilometers of freshwater. It was the fourth largest lake on Earth, larger than entire European nations, a body of water so massive it generated its own regional weather patterns, moderating temperatures across the steppe and feeding moisture into the atmosphere for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. The fishing industry it sustained produced 40,000 tons of catch annually. 24 distinct fish species thrived in it. The port city of Aralsk sat on its northern shore as a functioning hub of Central Asian commerce, its harbor crowded with trawlers, its economy built entirely around a resource that had existed, unchanged in its essential character, for millions of years. By 2000, that water body was gone. Not depleted, not reduced, gone. The surface area had contracted by more than 90%. What remained were two shallow hypersaline remnants, poisoned beyond biological use, their beds crusted with pesticide residue and salt deposits that the wind carried in clouds across the surrounding region. The Aralkum Desert, 57,000 square kilometers of toxic wasteland, had materialized in the span of a single human generation. Those ships did not drift there. The sea retreated and left them. Fishermen who had worked those waters their entire lives watched the coastline recede at a rate of several kilometers per year, then simply stopped coming back to a port with no sea. The World Health Organization documented the public health consequences: respiratory disease from toxic dust, infant mortality rates among the highest in the former Soviet Union, a regional cancer burden that epidemiologists traced directly to the salt and pesticide storms blowing off the exposed seabed. The world's scientific and environmental community reviewed the data and reached a unanimous conclusion. The Aral Sea was gone, permanent, unrecoverable. The resources required to restore it exceeded any realistic political or financial commitment, and the hydrology was irreversible. Maps were updated. Encyclopedias were revised. The Aral Sea was reclassified from a living body of water to a historical artifact. That consensus was not unreasonable. It was based on available evidence, presented by credentialed institutions, and it reflected a genuine catastrophe of almost incomprehensible scale. The mainstream narrative was not fabricated, it was simply incomplete. But policymakers and scientists in the 1950s had made a fateful decision that would take 40 years for the evidence to fully contradict. And the first crack in that consensus would not come from a university, a UN agency, or a major government research program. It would come from a group of local engineers in Kazakhstan who looked at the same data the world had already dismissed and found something everyone else had missed. And it gets worse. The Aral Sea did not die because the physics of its destruction were inevitable. It died because of an engineering project so catastrophically mismanaged that Soviet planners were, by conservative hydrology estimates, losing 3/4 of the water they were trying to move before it ever reached a crop. That figure is not disputed. It is documented in the infrastructure records of the Soviet Ministry of Water Management. And it is the detail that transforms this story from an environmental tragedy into something far more specific, an act of compounding institutional negligence that the establishment spent decades refusing to name accurately. Here is what the decision-makers of the 1950s actually built. 30,000 kilometers of irrigation canals stretching across the breadth of Central Asia, engineered to redirect the full combined flow of the Sirdarya and Amu Darya rivers, the two arterial lifelines that had fed the Aral for millennia, toward a massive cotton cultivation program serving the Soviet Empire. 45 dams, 80 reservoirs, an irrigation network on a scale the world had never previously attempted. On paper, it was an extraordinary feat of industrial ambition. In practice, it was a sieve. The canals were unlined, bare earth, exposed to one of the most intense evaporation climates on the planet, channeling water across hundreds of kilometers of open steppe. According to hydrological assessments of the network, an estimated 75% of the water those canals carried never completed the journey. It evaporated into the Central Asian sky or seeped directly into the desert substrate. The cotton fields received the remainder. The Aral received nothing. For 30 years, the two rivers that had sustained the fourth largest lake on Earth were being fed into a network that was functionally incapable of delivering what it promised. And the sea was paying the price in surface area, in volume, in species, in the livelihoods of every fishing family on its shores. Think about that. The greatest ecological catastrophe of the 20th century was not an unavoidable consequence of industrial progress. It was the downstream result of unlined canals. But while the global scientific community was writing the Aral's obituary and international environmental agencies were cataloging the damage for their reports, a group of local engineers in Kazakhstan were reading the basin maps differently. And what they found in the geometry of the northern basin is the reason you are watching this video. Now here's what you need to understand about the geometry of the problem, because this is where the official narrative completely breaks down. When the Aral Sea split in 1987, it did not divide into two equal halves. The North Aral, fed by the Sirdarya, was fundamentally different in its physical character from the south. It was narrower, and critically, it was deeper. While international scientists were modeling the sea as a single failing system and concluding the entire body was beyond recovery, the topographic data told a different story to anyone willing to read it carefully. A deeper, narrower basin loses proportionally less water to solar evaporation than a shallow, wide one. The surface area exposed to the sun is smaller. The volume-to-surface ratio is more favorable. In engineering terms, the North Aral was not a tray slowly baking dry. It was a cup, and a cup can be filled. In 1992, the mayor of Aralsk, Tanya Bajan-Damanov, and a team of local engineers grasped this physical reality and acted on it. Using dump trucks and earth-moving equipment, working with resources the central government had declined to provide, they constructed a crude sand dike across the Strait, the narrow channel connecting the north and south basins. The government in Almaty considered the project amateurish. Scientists who had already published the Aral's obituary dismissed it. The dike was built anyway, and the water in the north began, measurably and visibly, to rise. If this is reshaping what you thought you knew about irreversible disasters, hit subscribe. This channel goes deep on the evidence the mainstream ignores. Now, back to what happened when that wall finally broke, because the failure that came next is the moment everything changed. In 1999, the sand dike broke. A flood surge overwhelmed the structure that Damanov's team had built with dump trucks and determination, and the water that had been accumulating in the North Aral drained back toward the south. To the establishment, this was confirmation of what they had already concluded. The project was amateur, the materials were inadequate, and the whole enterprise had been exactly as naive as they said it was. The mockery, in their view, had been vindicated. They were reading the evidence backwards. When World Bank hydrologists examined what had actually happened at the Strait, not what failed, but the physical forces that caused the failure, they found something that changed the trajectory of the entire project. The hydraulic pressure that had destroyed the dike was enormous, far greater than a marginal or inconsequential barrier would generate. The water had been accumulating with genuine force, building against the structure with measurable weight, responding exactly as the cup-and-tray physics predicted it would. The dike had not failed because the idea was wrong. It had failed because sand and soil cannot indefinitely contain the pressure of a rising sea. The concept was proven. The only thing they lacked was an unbreakable structure. What the World Bank engineers brought back to Almaty was not a failure report. It was, effectively, an accidental proof of concept, and it was the document that forced the Kazakhstan government to stop laughing and start calculating the cost of concrete. The result was an $86 million investment in something the establishment had dismissed for a decade. And what that structure achieved next is the reason the scientific community has never quite recovered its confidence on the question of irreversible ecological loss. Now here's what you need to understand about what the Kokaral Dam actually is, because it is not, in any conventional sense, a water storage project. It is a physics intervention. The dam, completed in 2005, stretches 13 kilometers across the Strait, constructed from reinforced concrete with a regulated spillway that controls the precise water level maintained in the North Basin. But the engineering logic behind it is not primarily about blocking water. It is about defeating evaporation through geometry. The central Aral Basin had always lost water faster than the rivers could replenish it because the shallow, wide southern basin presented an enormous surface area to the Central Asian sun, hundreds of square kilometers of water spread thin, baking away under sustained heat. The north was different. By forcing incoming water from the Sidaria into a narrow, deep basin and sealing it at the strait, engineers were concentrating volume into a form the sun could not efficiently attack. Less surface area, greater depth, the cup, not the tray. The hydrological models built from this principle predicted the North Aral would take between 3 and 5 years to reach a stable water level of 42 meters above sea level. That was the conservative, peer-reviewed, institutional forecast. The results were supposed to take 5 years. They were completely wrong. The North Aral reached its target level in 7 months. Not years, months. And what happened inside that water, the biological transformation that no one had predicted with any precision, is the part of this story that makes the engineering achievement look almost secondary. But that's not even the most extraordinary part. When the water rose, it did not simply fill a basin. It rewrote the chemistry. Before the Kokaral Dam, the North Aral's salinity had reached 30 grams per liter, 3 times the concentration at which most freshwater species can survive, and well above the threshold at which fish eggs can hatch. The sea had not just lost its water, it had become biologically sterile, a body of water the size of a small nation, containing nothing that could live in it. By 2006, 1 year after the dam's completion, salinity had dropped to 8 grams per liter. The critical biological threshold for egg viability is 10. The North Aral had crossed it. No stocking program produced what came next. No government intervention seeded the recovery. The biological explosion that followed, flounder, carp, pike perch returning in populations numbering in the millions, was entirely self-generated. The ecosystem had been waiting, dormant in whatever biological memory a dying sea retains, for the chemistry to become survivable again. When it did, life did not return gradually, it detonated. Water volume surged from 14 billion to 27 billion cubic meters. The coastline advanced 75 kilometers back toward the city of Aralsk. If you've made it this far, you're the kind of person who needs the real data, not the headline. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Our next deep dive covers the megastructures currently reshaping water systems across 3 continents. But the recovery didn't stop at the shoreline. What the rising water did to the economy of the Aral region, and what Kazakhstan is now building to push the transformation even further, is the final piece of this story, and it carries a weight that goes well beyond one sea. Now here's what you need to understand about where this is going, because Kazakhstan did not stop at the Kokaral Dam. The economic transformation that followed the biological recovery is, by any measure, staggering. Where there was once only salt crust, and the rusted infrastructure of a dead industry. There are now 12 high-tech fish processing facilities operating at commercial scale. 8,000 tons of fish are processed annually, flounder and pike perch meeting the biological safety standards required for export to European markets. Over 3,000 people have returned to the Aral coast in what regional demographers describe as a reverse migration with no precedent in Central Asian history. These are not people relocating for government subsidies. They are fishermen returning to a coastline that the world's scientific community had certified as permanently dead. The Kazakhstan government, having been forced by physical evidence to fund the project it once ridiculed, is now funding its expansion. The Sinas 2 project currently underway calls for raising the dam's spillway from 42 to 46 meters, a structural modification designed to push the coastline the remaining distance back toward the harbor cranes of Aralsk that have stood idle for 30 years. The target is to reunite the sea with the port that built its identity around it. However, when you stand on the edge of the Kokaral Dam and look south, the reality is still chilling. The southern Aral, the larger basin, the tray is gone. It will not recover on any human timescale. The Aralkum Desert is permanent. The contrast between the thriving north and the industrial graveyard visible on the southern horizon is the image that carries the full weight of this story's final lesson. The north and the south, one living, one dead, both the result of human decisions. That contrast, visible from the top of a single concrete wall in Kazakhstan, is the full shape of everything this video has shown you. A sea that sustained 40,000 tons of fish per year, erased by unlined canals. A local mayor and a team of engineers dismissed as amateurs, vindicated by physics. A sand dike that broke and proved a theory. A dam that took 7 months to do what experts said would take 5 years. Salinity crossing the biological threshold. Life detonating in water that had contained nothing for 3 decades. Fishermen returning to a coastline the map said no longer existed. Every one of those data points is measurable, physical, verifiable, and together they point to a conclusion the establishment has not yet fully absorbed. Ecological death, in most cases, is not a verdict. It is a choice disguised as inevitability. If a 13-kilometer wall can reverse the century's greatest environmental disaster, then the question is no longer whether dying ecosystems can be saved. The question is why we keep deciding not to save them. Lake Chad has lost 90% of its surface area since 1963. Lake Urmia in Iran is now less than 10% of its former size. The topographic data for both exists. The physics that saved the North Aral is not unique to Kazakhstan. The cup-and-tray principle does not require a particular latitude or a particular geology. It requires someone willing to read the basin maps and act on what they find before the world's institutions finish writing the obituary. If this changed how you see what we call irreversible, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to see the evidence. Drop your thoughts below. We read everyone. The Aral Sea was declared dead. The water is rising. The only thing that was truly irreversible was the decision to give up.